What is up guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I thought I'd try and do something a little bit different. I'm actually going to do a review of Wun Two's brand new album called Ships 2. This is a follow-up to his EP called Ships, and it's one of my favourite all-time lo-fi hip-hop albums. So as soon as I saw that he'd put this out, he put a post on Instagram, I was straight over to Spotify to listen to it. So basically what I'm going to do in this video is do my reaction to each individual track. Now there are 26 tracks on this album, so it's quite a big one. So some of them I may only say a couple of words, but I want to try and find some new techniques and things that I can use in my own beats, and hopefully there's some takeaways for everyone from this, from me analysing each of the tracks on this album. So really excited to do this one. I hope it's the kind of content that you're into, and also let me know if this is something that you do like actually in the comments below, because I can do more, and leave any albums that you want me to do it on as well. If there's been new releases from beat artists or lo-fi beat makers, I can do my reactions to those tracks and we can kind of go through together and analyse the things that we like about them, things we don't like about them, and see if there's anything we can learn. So without further ado, I'm going to get on with this one and we're going to go straight into track one. Track one is called Arum and it sounds a little bit like this. Okay, so that was the opening track, Arum, and to be honest, it wasn't anything of a particular surprise to me. It sounded very, very Wun Two, very signature to his sound. One thing that really stood out in this beat was the snare. It sounds absolutely crazy, and that's never really a sound I've ever thought about using before on my own beats, so I really, really like that about it. And another great thing about this one as well is the tambourine in the background, which is kind of doubling up with the hi-hat. I really, really like the effect, and I love where it sits in the mix as well. It's this kind of low down, dirty sound to it, and works really well. So yeah, apart from that, I don't think there's much more to say about the opening one. It's very, very signature to his sound, and yeah, there are a few takeaways there, but nothing blowing me away with that one. Obviously really enjoyed it because I'm into the Wun Two sound, but yeah, nothing struck me there as completely out of this world about that track. Okay, let's get on to track number two. This one is called Boombacks, and it goes a little something like this. Okay, that was Boombacks, and this is something that I wanted to mention about Wun Two generally, is that he very rarely deviates from just the standard loop with the drums. In most of his tracks, there are never any kind of loop variations, which I find really, really interesting because, to me, I think lo-fi hip-hop can get repetitive very easily, and I'm always looking at new ways that I can add variations and keep the beat fresh, but he seems to do a really, really good job of being able to just keep playing the same loop over and over again, and it doesn't get any less interesting. So I think in this one in particular, there is again this kind of low percussion sound, which is low in the mix. I don't know if that's part of the original sample or not, but I really, really like the effect of that. If he's programmed that, that's really cool. And as well, I think the reverb on the hi-hat works really nicely in this beat. It just helps to fill it out a little bit. But yeah, try and see if you can hear that piece of percussion, which is a bit lower in the mix. It's kind of like the resonance of a drum hit, but I don't know whether it actually relates to anything that's actually being programmed in. I think it may just be either part of the original sample, or he's actually got that sound and programmed it in underneath, which is really, really cool. So yeah, see if you can listen to that one. I think that's a really interesting technique that he's used. Okay, next up we're on to a track called Cala, and this is the third track on Ships 2, so let's go ahead and listen to this one and see what we can find from this track. Okay, that was Cala, and personally speaking, I think that was quite a weird one for Wun Two. That doesn't really sound much like his style. I think the sub and the drums definitely sound like his kind of signature sound, but the sample that he's chosen there is a strange one. It almost sounds a little bit like he sampled maybe a synth that he's got hold of. I can imagine that's been him playing into a device and then chopping it up himself. It could also be a sample as well. I'm not really too sure about that one, but it certainly has that vibe of he's played it in himself and then chopped it up. So I like the vibe of the track. I think it is a real head nodder, but I don't really like the sample that he used. He tends to use much darker sounding samples, and I think this one just sounds a little bit kind of jolly for his sort of style. So it's an interesting little track, and it breaks up the flow of things very early on in the album. So yeah, I'm not too sure about what I think about that one, but I think it's cool that he's done something a little bit different, because otherwise I think this album will be in danger of just sounding way too repetitive. So it's a cool little experiment, I think, this track, and I do like the overall kind of vibe of it, but I just don't really like that sample in particular. So not my favourite one on this album, but still quite a cool beat to listen to anyway. Okay, track 4 is called Drabba, so let's give this one a listen and see what this one sounds like. Okay, that was Drabba, and the things that stick out for me in that one in particular are the crispiness of the drums. They just sound absolutely amazing. He seems to get this really, really nice sound on the snares every time he uses them, pretty much. They've always got such a nice balance between snappiness and smoothness at the same time. The drums just always sit really well in the mix in Wun Two's beats, I think. Now, check out this sub bass line in this one. I don't think this is programmed, but it sounds absolutely crazy. There's so many notes going on, but it still seems to work somehow, so really impressive stuff there. I would love to think that that's programmed, but I definitely think that was part of the original sample that he sampled, or he's found that bass line and layered it underneath. Either way, the whole vibe of the song is really cool. Again, this is a very Wun Two style beat, and I love the snappiness of the drums in this one. I really like this track. Okay, the next one is Ephedra, so let's give this one a listen. Okay, again, this track is very similar to Wun Two's sort of signature sound. You've got those very crispy drums and the kind of lo-fied sample in there. Now, there's a lot of bit crush on that one. I really like the sound of that when you get that ring on the sample. Really, really pleasant on the ear. It's cool how it's bit crush, but it still sounds smooth at the same time. I know that sounds really crazy, but quite often when I use bit crush or sample in a lower fidelity or a lower quality, it sounds a bit harsh, so maybe he's used a bit of EQ to level that off a little bit. But generally speaking, really like that track as well, and I think the sub bass line in that is really cool. Again, it's only a couple of notes, but it adds so much kind of bounce to the track, and yeah, it's really interesting when you get locked into that bass line. Proper nice vibe to it. So there's a couple of things going on there which are really interesting to listen to. You've got the effects on the samples and the sub bass line as well, so that goes down as a decent track for me, that one. I really enjoyed that one. Okay, moving on to track 6. This is called Albezia. I think that's the right way to say it. Some of these names are a bit difficult to say, so I think it's Albezia, and let's give this one a listen. Okay, that was Albezia. I really, really like this track for a couple of reasons. The snare sound is amazing. It's a really, really short tail on it. It's very, very snappy. And I've always liked that kind of sound ever since I've started listening to Wun Two. I do that with my snares a lot on the beats that I create. So really, really like that. And another technique that he uses in this track, which I think he uses quite a lot actually, is that he really kind of takes the high end off the samples, and they've got this kind of like muddy smoothness to them. And I say muddy and I don't mean that in a bad way. They've just got that kind of lo-fi, kind of filtered sort of sound to them. I hope that makes sense. If you listen to the track, I'm sure you'll know what I mean. So I think one of the things that he does with his mixes, and I could be wrong here, could be talking absolute nonsense, but he leaves a lot of the high end of the mix to the drums and lets the sample kind of fill out its own little space. And that's something I've never really thought about before. I tend to try and let the sample do a lot of the work, whereas I think Wun Two is the opposite in a way. He lets the sub and the drums do a lot of the mix, take up a lot of the mix, and then the sample is just kind of layered on the top, or it's layered somewhere in the mix. I don't think it's usually very prominent. It's usually quite low in the mix. It's a really interesting kind of way of approaching beat making, and that's definitely a takeaway which I want to take into my own music, is to get the sample sounding nice and smooth and a bit lo-fi, and then have those drums really strong over the top, and the sub as well. Now the sub in this one isn't too prominent, but in other tracks you will notice on this album that it really is. And I think one thing that's interesting about this track is the kick. Now check out the kick, because I guarantee that if I heard that kick in my collection, I probably wouldn't use it on a track because I just think it sounds quite weak, but for some reason in this beat it just works perfectly. It's not too overpowering. I think that's something I really want to take away from this as well, is that it's easy to overpower your beats with the kicks when I don't think you really need to. As long as it's got its own space in the mix, it can still be there and not have to be completely overbearing for the rest of the beat. So that's definitely a takeaway which I'm taking from this album, is find the little pocket for the mix for your kick and just have it playing there nicely away. It doesn't have to be really loud and overpowering. Okay, moving on to the next track. This is called Philego. Okay, that was Philego, and a slightly muddier mix for that one. Usually his drums are really, really clean, but in that one they're slightly muddier. And there's two things that I really want to mention now that I've listened to this track. Again, one of them is You notice that repetitiveness again of the loops. They just go round and round and round. And in a way, it's kind of hypnotizing in a good way. It kind of draws you in and you get used to the beat, you get familiar with it. And then once you're into the beat, you start picking up little things that he's added in over the top and stuff like that. So I do actually kind of like the repetitiveness of his beats, but I'd be interested to know what you guys think. Do you think they're too repetitive? Do you think you should do more variations? And the other one in this is something that I wanted to mention as well, that a lot of his samples sound very kind of European, either Latin or like Spanish sounding. He definitely digs around those kind of genres quite a lot. Now, that's something I've not really explored too much, so I definitely want to give that a go myself now after listening to this album. I'm way too locked in with jazz samples. I just need to get away from that. So maybe this is a good way of me getting away from that, is to try some Spanish, like Latino, Latin sort of style music. You'll notice a lot of guitar work, and yeah, he digs around that quite a lot. Now, I think he is German, so he's European, but I definitely get that vibe from a lot of his beats that they're heavily influenced by that kind of either Southern American or Spanish sounds. So yeah, enjoyed that track, very interesting, and I think I learned a little bit more about kind of what he's about from that track. Okay, the next track up is called Hedera, so let's give this one a listen. Okay, that was Hedera, and there's two things that I want to note from this one. The snare is wacky and like it just, I would never think to use a sound like that in a beat, but it's got so much crack and whip to it. And the other thing that I wanted to point out about this track is the simplicity of the sub bass. So if you're new to sub bass, listen to this track, because you really don't have to do too much in order to make the beat sound way more interesting and give it that low end presence. He literally uses one note and just repeats that one note, but it does really aid the beat and makes it sound a lot more full. So yeah, check out the track Hedera if you're struggling with sub bass lines. This might be some inspirations just to get started, and I think it will help you to understand how you can start with one note and slowly build up. You don't need too much variation in your sub to make it sound interesting, in my opinion. So yeah, another cool track, and those takeaways I think are really useful, especially for beginners looking to add low end into their beats. Okay, on to track 9, and this one is called Enula, I think. So let's see what this one sounds like. Okay, really like that one. Now check out if you can hear the percussion. It was coming in on my left ear, right near the kind of bottom of my ear, if that makes sense. You know, when you listen to something, there's kind of, you can feel all the different things in different positions. That sounds like right down here in my left ear. There's this cool little piece of percussion. I think that adds quite a lot. It actually really reminds me of this Mr. Scruff song that I used to listen to quite a lot. Now, I do wonder whether he actually sampled it from that, because the sound of it is so similar. I'll find the name of the song and I'll put it in the link. I'll put it in the description or something so that you guys can listen, because that starts off with this piece of percussion. I'm really sure he sampled that. It's quite a nice feeling to hear a sample and I think I actually know what that track's from. So yeah, I think this is more sort of standard Wun Two. Again, the drums are absolutely amazing. And I really like how he uses vocals like this. They're always really pitched down, but they still sound so smooth. There's no artifacts on them whatsoever. And he does this quite a lot with vocal-based samples. You'll hear that they're like really pitched down, but they still sound amazingly smooth. So yeah, I enjoyed that one, and try and see if you can hear that piece of percussion laid underneath. Especially if you're using headphones, you'll be able to hear it in your left ear. Okay, so on to track 10, and this one's called Jacaranda, so let's get this one going. Okay, that was Jacaranda, and I feel like this beat has a really different feel to it compared to what we've already listened to in this album. This sounds a lot more like kind of traditional boom bap and sort of golden era hip hop. I can definitely imagine someone rapping over this, whereas with the others I kind of get taken in by the different sounds and stuff that he's using. With this one straight away, I was like, this is a vibe, and I can definitely hear vocals on the top of this. So that's another interesting thing. He very rarely uses kind of like rap little snippets and stuff like that over the top of his beats. He does actually do it on a later track, which I'll point out. So personally to me, I do think this has that kind of golden era sound to it. Let me know if you think that's the case in the comments below, but I really enjoyed this one. And yeah, like I say, I can definitely hear some rap vocals over the top of that one. Okay, moving on to track 11, and this one is called Lunaria, so let's get this one going and see what this one sounds like. Okay, there's only really two things that I want to mention about this one. I really enjoyed it. Again, you can hear that kind of Southern American Spanish influence in this one with the guitar sample. And the drums as well are just so clinically clean, and I definitely think there's layers going on the snare there. It's like two things are hitting at the same time, so have a listen to that and see if you can notice it. It's definitely not just a snare on its own. There's been something layered on the top of it to give it that extra kind of texture, I guess, to make it sound a little bit more interesting. So a cool track, and you can definitely hear that Spanish influence that I mentioned earlier in the album. And again, just great work again with the drums on this one. It sounds really, really nice. Okay, this next track is called Malaika, I think is the right pronunciation. It could be Malika or Malaisa, I'm not really sure, but that is roughly what it's called. I'm sure you'll be able to work it out. This is track 12, so I'm going to put this one on and see what this one sounds like. Okay, I think this is one of my favourites from the album. This is absolutely amazing. The snare sounds crazy in this one. There's huge reverb on it. It's got a massive tail on it, but still has that crack to it. And I really like the way there's just a slight hint of a vocal at the end of the loop, and then it just skips back to the start of the loop just as it's about to come in. So again, this is one of those things that if I did that in one of my loops, it would probably sound awful, but for some reason in this one, it just works perfectly. You're just expecting something else to come in, and then it's immediately taken away from you. And again, it gives you that kind of hypnotic feel as it's going round and round, just giving you that little bit of vocal at the end of each loop. So I really, really like that track. That's probably one of my favourites on this album. And yeah, I think that trick with the vocal is really cool, something I definitely want to try myself. Okay, the next track is track 13. It's called Nardus. So I'm going to have a listen to this, and then I'll share my thoughts after it. Okay, so like I mentioned, he rarely uses rap vocals in his beats, but in this one he does. He uses some little snippets which work really, really nicely with a little bit of delay on them. Again, the snare in this one, I don't know how he gets these sounds. They sound like really meshy. I think it's mainly down to reverb. He uses a lot of reverb on his snares, and that gives it that kind of really meshy, kind of metallic sound to it. Again, works perfectly in this beat, so yeah, really enjoyed that one. And again, interesting to hear that he's layered some rap vocals on this one. He doesn't tend to do that an awful lot. Okay, the next track is called Oxalis, and it sounds something like this. Okay, I think this track really just highlights the genius of Wun Two, really. He is the king of keeping it simple but making it interesting at the same time. Now this track, the sample is paper thin. There's not a lot going on there at all. It's kind of like a little vocal sample. There's no depth to it whatsoever, but all that depth that's missing from the sample, he just seems to be able to fill it so easily and effortlessly with drums and sub. So that's the shortest track on the album. It's only 23 seconds long. But yeah, I mean, there's not an awful lot you can say about that one. Just that, yeah, it's genius how he keeps things so simple, but also manages to make these interesting loops as well. So moving on to the next one, this track is called Pinus. So I'm going to give this a listen and see what it sounds like. Okay, again in this one we can hear that kind of Spanish influence in his beats, that Spanish guitar playing along, and check out that noise in the loop as well. That kind of, it almost sounds like someone spilling something in a way, but it just works really well. I've never thought of ever adding some kind of sound like that to my loop, so it just brings in each loop. It just kind of introduces each loop really nicely with that kind of spilt kind of sound. I can't really think of any other way to explain it apart from, you know, kind of like spilling dry rice or something like that. So very interesting sound on that one. Again, we hear the Spanish influence and the Spanish samples with that guitar work. So yeah, a cool little beat. Enjoyed that one. And let's move on to the next one. Okay, that track, Radula, I think that's a really interesting one because you have that kind of droned synth over the top. Now, I don't know whether he's stacked samples here or whether he's added that himself. I don't know how much he uses his own hardware to make music. I think it's mainly sample based, so I think if he has actually layered the samples there, that's really, really cool. I think it's amazing when people layer samples. So yeah, I love the texture of that. There's just kind of that really long drone underneath, and again, you know, I'm running out of things to say about how good the drums are, to be honest, because the drums always just seem to come in and sound so perfect. So yeah, I think that drone was the most interesting thing about that beat in particular. So let's move on. This next one is called Salvia, and no points for guessing what this one is about. Okay, in that one you can definitely hear that he's used the bass from the original sample to fill out the low end in this one, so you can hear that kind of double bass sound. I really love the double bass in a beat. I think it just sounds absolutely perfect. I do like the way he uses his own subs, but I think in this particular one, you can't really explain that sound of a double bass, but when it just hits behind the drums, it just sounds so perfect to me. So really digging this one. And again, he's used that kind of technique where he's taken a lot of the high end off the sample, almost like a low pass filter on it, and let the drums and the sub do the work. So we've definitely recognised that that's a pattern in this album, I think. And that's definitely one of the biggest takeaways I'm going to take from this particular listen through, is that it's a lot easier to let the drums and the sub do the work. So that's definitely where my focus is going to be shifting to after this. Okay, the next track is track 18, and it is Tillia. Okay, this is interesting for two reasons, I think. I really like that little vocal that he's layered into the loop. I've heard this technique used a lot, where you just kind of put something in a loop which isn't percussion or drums or the sample. You just layer in a little like vocal stab or something, but it's in every single loop. And he does that perfectly in this one. It just works really, really well. And also the other thing to mention about this one is the way that the loop kind of almost sounds like it's been cut wrong. The two kicks at the start of the bar kind of hit over each other at the same time, so that's a very interesting effect. Again, he's pulled it off and it sounds great, but it would be something that I've never thought of doing, so maybe again that's something else to consider for my next beats. Okay, moving on to the next track. This one is called Verbena, so I'm going to listen to this one and share my thoughts. Really like that one. The sample choice is amazing. I think that's a great little sample, and that snare, again, it just sounds absolutely perfect. I would love to have access to the drums that he's got, because that snare just sits so well in the mix on that one, and it's just so satisfying to listen to. So yeah, enjoyed that track. The snare in particular, I think, really stood out in that one. Just thought that snare sounds incredible, and I really like how interesting that sample is as well. There's plenty to feed off of there in terms of listening to the record. There's loads going on in that sample, so enjoyed that one. Okay, we're on to track 20. This is Laryx. We're approaching the end of the album now. This really is a long one, so let's go on with this track and see what it sounds like. Okay, that was quite an interesting one. There's something definitely going on in the background of that one. Now, I don't know if it's from the original sample, but there's kind of like guitar vamps in the background. So see if you can pick those out when you're listening to it. You can hear these vamps in the background playing, and I think that's the correct term for it anyway. And yeah, just pretty standard stuff here from Wun Two. I don't think this is anything out of the ordinary for him, but again, a really, really nice snare hit in this one. Very, very clean, and yeah, I think it's really interesting the depth in that sample that he's used as well. So see if you can hear that guitar work in the background. Be interesting to know if he layered that in or not. Don't think he did. It's just probably the way that the chops have fallen, but works really well on this track. Okay, the next one is called a Doxa, so I'm going to give that one a listen right now. Okay, not really anything to take away from that one in particular, apart from I really liked the layer of kind of rainforest noise that he's used on this track. It's really subtle, but it is there, you can hear it, and if you get tuned into it, it just adds that really interesting amount of layer to the beat, if that makes sense. It just gives it another dimension, which is really pleasing to the ear. So the beat in general, quite standard really, a kind of Rhodes sample, but then that layer just really makes it a little bit more unique, so enjoyed that one. Okay, only a few left now. This one's called Apuntier, I think is the way to say this one. So let's see what this one sounds like. Okay, this one again seems like a homage or a homage back to the golden era of hip-hop. I really do think this sounds a lot different to the rest of the stuff on the album. Apart from the whippy snares that he always uses, obviously, the sample choice, etc., sounds really, really golden era, really boom bap. And this is another track which, again, I can imagine the vocals on the top of. So really, really like the vibe of this one, even though it's a bit different to everything else. And yeah, I think, like I say, it's definitely a nod back to the early days of hip-hop, this one, I think, especially the golden era in the 90s, etc. Okay, the next one is called Cilia, or Scylla, maybe. Quite a difficult one to say. So let's get this one on and see what this one sounds like. Okay, I think that's the first time in this album that he's used a pause in the loop with the chops, so that's an interesting technique. I've only managed to pull that off a couple of times with my own beats. I rarely do that because I just don't like those blank spaces in my loops, but listening to this one, maybe thinking back, it's something that I should probably try again. And yeah, I think that's the only takeaway from that one, really. Just those pauses were quite an interesting element. Okay, the next track is called Malvar. Okay, that was Malvar. This is another personal favourite from this record because of the layering of the vocals. It's so well done. You can hear there's one bit of the first kind of half of the beat, and then you think it could be part of the sample because it's playing with the sample every time, but then a bit later he changes it out for a different vocal overlay over the top. And I just really like it when another sample is layered on top of another one. Now, this is something I've actually started doing recently myself, is layering on vocals, but the way he's done this one is so clean, everything's in tune, executed it perfectly, and yeah, that variation towards the end of the track in the layer that he uses, swapping it out for a different vocal, is just really, really genius. So I've really enjoyed that one. That's definitely going down as one of my favourites as well. So just two more left to go. This one is called Famaria, and then just another one called Isatis. So two more to go. I'll pop this one on now. Okay, Famaria is quite an interesting track. I think it's the first time we really hear that proper like lo-fi mix on his beat. I've tried to get that mix so many times, it's very, very difficult to do. It sounds simple, so whether it's to do with the gear he's processed it through or the effects that he's used, I'm not too sure, but I really like the mix of this one because I think it's just a lot different to the rest of the album. It's a lot muddier, and I kind of like that. It's kind of a break from those really sort of hard-hitting drums. So I definitely think that was something that was required in this album. I wouldn't have minded a couple more of those maybe, just to break things up a little bit. But yeah, that track in particular, you can really tell that there's a different mix going on. So very interesting to hear that he's done that for that track. So this is the last track. It's called Isatis, and it sounds like this. So it's just a short one to finish off, but I really, really like this one. It's got that really kind of thought-provoking sound about it. Those kind of beats always remind me of kind of being in a big city. I don't know why it is. It's something to do with me personally. When I hear a beat like that that kind of provokes a lot of thought, it always reminds me of kind of being in a city at night. So I really like that sign-off. I think it's a nice little track, and yeah, like I say, it gives me those real nostalgia vibes. I love the sound of the sample in that one. So that's it for this one, guys. Quite a long video. I wanted to do that one because I really, really love Wun Two. He's been a massive influence on me, and I think he's going to be even more of an influence on me after doing that full analysis. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please let me know, because I'd love to do more of these. If there's any albums which have been recently released which you think I'd be into and you want me to listen to and review, then let me know. I think there was a lot to learn from that one. I've certainly taken a lot of notes which are going to be applying to my beats. In particular, I think the percussion layers are really, really nice. Definitely need to try and start cutting more drums from records. I think that's how he's getting such a nice sound on them. And layering samples as well is another thing. And yeah, using those low pass filters on the samples and letting the drums and the sub do the work, that kind of different approach to the mix that I was talking about as well, is definitely something that I'm going to be trying as well. So thank you very much for watching. If you got this far, I hope you found it interesting and even useful. Don't forget you can support what I do at spvids.com. I've got drums there, and I've got t-shirts on Teespring. Check out the links in the description. I'll try and remember to post everything. I'm now going to go and have to edit this humongous video, so wish me luck. So look after yourselves and keep making beats, guys. I'll be back very, very soon. Peace!